Welcome to Lesson 1. After watching this lesson, please have a look at the link below and watch Lesson 2. You need to watch that lesson immediately after. Thank you. I called this video Programming in English. In my experience, people who are new to programs struggle to conceptualize the programming language and turn it into code. I used a technique where they would be taught how to create pseudocode. Secondly, I wanted to take persons who had written code before and teach them techniques to do object-orientated analysis. Here I call this technique advanced programming in English. And thirdly, I wanted to cover the latest technique where business analysts use statements given, when, then, which they put into what we call Gherkin files in the industry to provide specifications for the code you have to write. Welcome to Lesson 1. This lesson is going to teach you how to break up a program we want to write into a list of tasks. This will make writing your first Java programs or any other language easier. We are going to introduce the concept of variables, functions, classes as part of object-orientated analysis, and we are going to look at how you can identify the building blocks of your code from a JAD session result. We are also going to show you how a business analyst defines each major step of an application using a new standard based on English statements given, when, then. I came up with the concept of programming in English to help two persons. When I was at IBM, we had an intern who couldn't put Java language into Java code, and I was given the task to help. My daughter had decided to do a computer science degree, not having done any computer subjects at school. And I used that technique that I had helped the Java intern at IBM to teach my daughter how to think in code. And with that, she could be able to write the code into statements. Now, this is how it works. Imagine you gave a robot instructions to bake a cake. And these instructions would be a program, but the language would be English. So if we look here on the screen, we see we start with place a bowl on the table, put 300 grams of flour in the bowl, and we continue going down this program till we reach line 13, where we say heat for 10 minutes and remove the cake mold from the oven. At that point, we are ready to eat the cake. So this is the idea, and what we are talking about now is pseudo code. In other words, instead of writing Java or Python or C++ code, we are writing English statements. And each thing that we want the program to do, we write it on a separate line. So you see, like line 4 says stir for a minute. And line 5 says if eggs are not mixed, stir for a minute, and in brackets go to step 4. So this is what the program looks like, but it's written in English. Now imagine you were asked to write a program that would be a calculator. So I would write the following steps: accept the first number, accept the second number, choose an operation. In brackets I put there add. Execute the operation, return the result. And that's basically what the calculator does. Here's another practical example. You were asked to write a program for a bank teller system. You worked at a bank and the business wanted you to create a program. So what we do is we write all the steps of the code in English. And this is also what a business analyst does. They give you what the code should do and they write that in English. So the customer places a credit card into the ATM. She is prompted to type a PIN code. She types the PIN code, if correct. So what we have here is two possibilities. If she had an invalid PIN code, or if the credit card was invalid, you would get what we call a sad case. And if the credit card was valid and the PIN code was valid, we would get what we call the happy case. Having that, we now have rules. This is how business rules are created. And as you can see, we wrote down all the steps that you need to do. And later you will see how this turns into Java or Python or any other language, C++. Now, every language has variables. According to Wikipedia, a variable is an abstract storage location paired with an associated symbolic name. At school, we used X, Y, and Z in algebra and in trigonometry. However, when we write code, we prefer to give variables meaningful names. Short cryptic names are frowned upon. The only time you do that is in a for loop, where you can say for equals I. Otherwise, we use variables like temperature, voltage, cost price, speed, direction, name, email address. And with variables, we store either numeric values or text values into variables. Functions, in Java we call them methods. In BASIC we call them subroutines, but today we refer to them as functions depending on the language you work with. In Java we will talk about methods. Instead of repeating the same code everywhere you want to make an operation or perform an operation, we put that code into a function and we call it many times. This also helps to make our code smaller. The ideal is I should have one line of code, and that should call other functions, and those functions should call other functions. It makes the code easier to manage, and if I can understand it, then anybody can be able to work with it. There is also a rule that in the old days we had a green terminal, and we would say that the function length should be one screen of the terminal. However, today we have a rule that says the function should be as short as possible. As with variables, we give functions names. And functions should never be given cryptic names. They should be explanatory. Calculate interest. Perform database operation. These are the type of names that we give functions or methods, so that when you see the function, you already know what it's doing. So we talk about self-describing code. As we learned about variables and functions, we also have classes. What a class is, you can call it a self-standing program or a self-standing bit of code. And this has its own methods or functions and its own variables. And according to Wikipedia, a class is an object, and these are building blocks in object-orientated programming languages. What we're doing is where we used a function to take code out of your program, so that every time you repeated the same code in your program, you moved it into a function. Now we take functions and variables and we put them into what we call a class. Classes are written for a specific role. So I can have a class that has to do with accounts. I can have a class that has to do with the customer. So an account may have a customer and a balance and a status, if it's in overdraft, if the account is locked. All that we put into a class. So you can see that these are like structures. There's a structure that represents an account. There's a structure that represents a person. There can be a structure that represents a transaction in banking. In the Programming in English section, we learnt about how you make statements to describe what the code is going to do. Now here, we are doing something a bit more advanced. We are going to identify in simple English statements how an entire system behaves. Given that your task is to develop such a system, this will come out of what we call a JAD session. When writing Java applications, we need to know certain conventions. A class can be a program or it can be a representation of an entity, like an account, a customer, an address book, a person, a transaction. Class names are nouns, so that's how we identify what is a class. A method in Java is what we call a function in other languages. A method is an operation. So method names have verbs: deposit cash, transferred from autoteller, transferred from internet banking system. And a variable is used to store and retrieve information. Variables are stored in memory as values. A variable name is always an adjective. Remember, in English we said an adjective describes a noun. In this case, the adjective describes the class. So if my class is a vehicle, what would describe my vehicle is the direction that I am driving, the speed that I am driving, the amount of fuel I have in my petrol tank. These values are stored in variables. It can also be when we work with a customer, your variable would be the name of the customer, the email address of a customer, the account number of a customer, and all the information pertaining to a customer stored in variables. So as you can see, the customer class has got methods, and its methods could be things like operations. I transferred cash. So that would be the methods of the customer, and then the variables would be the customer's name, email address, and things like that. We've been talking about a JAD session. In big organizations like banks, before they decide to develop a new system, they get all the shareholders into a room. So you will find the users of the system, the business analysts, you will find the architects, and even some of the senior Java or senior developers will all be sitting in the same room. And they will start describing the system in simple English terms. When we are completed the JAD session, we will take the result of the description of the system and we will start looking for nouns. The nouns will identify classes. We will also look for verbs and we will also look for adjectives. So nouns will be words like customer, credit card, savings account, database, etc., etc. Verbs will be statements like made a deposit, withdrew cash, made a transfer to an account. And adjectives will be statements representing values: payment amount, withdrawal amount, transfer amounts. As we mentioned earlier, the class names are nouns. The method or function names are verbs. These are operations. And the variables are adjectives. So coming out of a JAD session, this is what we got: the customer, the credit card, savings account, database, and more. And these were the nouns we identified. We also got the following verbs: made a deposit, withdrew cash, made a transfer to an account. If it was a vehicle system, it would be turn left, turn right, go forward, go back, start, stop. These are operations. And then we identified class variables. These were adjectives like payment amount, withdrawal amount, transfers. It could even be in a air conditioning system. It could even be things like temperature. Now here is what came out of a JAD session. This was the result. We have a banking system which allows a customer to use an ATM to withdraw cash. We may dispense an amount from $10 to $500. The customer may deposit cash into her bank account. We have scanners that scan the money placed into the ATMs. We do not accept banknotes of any currency that we cannot transact with. We allow our customers to make transfers from our ATMs. Our customers may make payments from our ATMs. After every transaction, we print the details of the transaction. We do not print the customer's name and account numbers. So if you look here, all the words that are highlighted, you can see these are verbs, nouns, and adjectives. From that JAD session, this is what we learned. The nouns or the classes identified were banking system, customer, ATM, transactions. And then we had verbs. These are methods or functions. Well, that's what they identify. Withdraw cash, deposit cash, make transfers, make payments, print the details. And then we have adjectives. These are variables. Remember, they describe the noun. Now, if you look there, there was an amount, and then from $10 to $500, so that would obviously be a range. And currency, we identified currency that we can transact with. In other words, we would have to perform a validation to validate that the banknote placed in the auto teller was one of those currencies that we can transact with. Other adjectives that we identified were customer name and account numbers. So the outcome of that object-orientated analysis, using the results of the JAD session, we identified the classes as well as the functions or methods in Java and their variables. At this point in time, you have enough information to be able to write the code. Recently, business analysts started using English statements, given, when, then, to describe the way we should write our code. And this is what they give us as specifications. So they will take all the happy cases. Remember, we mentioned earlier, we spoke about happy cases, and all the sad cases, and each of these cases will be represented as a single rule. So you'll get a whole lot of rules like what we are seeing on the screen. And it helps a developer to be able to understand what is required, and that way you know what code to write. So it's not like when you were in computer science and the professor said to you, write a program that does this or that, and that's all you got. Now they are telling you how to write the program. So let's have a look at this. The business rules describe how the program written should behave. So we are talking about behavior. And remember, behavior, we're talking about verbs. So this is your functions. We identified the classes from the object-orientated analysis. But now they are telling us how to write the functions, or in Java, how to write the methods. The business analyst writes rules using given, when, and then statements to describe how the code should work. In other words, how the functions should be written. And we have many of these statements written to describe a system. So let's have a look at some of these coming out of the previous JAD session. Given, the customer inserts a valid credit card into the auto teller. When the customer types a valid PIN code and chooses to withdraw $10, then dispense $10 and print a statement. So as you can see, this was a happy case. And then you would get another one with a sad case. So an invalid card was inserted into the auto teller, and it would give you the behavior, what you need to do. Spit out the card and display a message. And then the card was valid, but the PIN code was invalid. So there you need to give the customer 3 chances to type the correct PIN code, otherwise to either swallow the card or spit the card out and block the customer's account. Obviously these rules vary from bank to bank, but that is the gist of it. please click the like button and also subscribe to this channel to help this channel grow. And also have a look in the comments and click on the show more link so that you can see what other videos we have in this series of training courses. Thank you for that.